Well, the defence team of Donald Trump in his impeachment trial have got more to think about, in part because of this article from the New York Times, quoting to be a published book written by the former US National Security Advisor John Bolton. In this book, Mr. Bolton says President Trump told him that he wanted to hold back military aid for Ukraine until the Ukrainians had announced an investigation into his political rival Joe Biden. Bear in mind, that's exactly what the Democrats were accusing the president of when they started this impeachment process. It's also a direct contradiction of what the president says. Here's Donald Trump saying, I never told John Bolton that the aid for Ukraine was tied to investigations into the Democrats, including the Bidens. In fact, he never complained about this at the time of his very public termination. If John Bolton said this, it was only to sell a book. Now, the big issue that this connects to is whether new witnesses will be called during this trial. That can only happen with a majority vote, and the Republicans hold 53 of the 100 Senate seats. But might Republican unity be cracking? We'll look at this from Susan Collins, a Republican senator from Maine. The reports about John Bolton's book strengthen the case for witnesses and have prompted a number of conversations amongst my colleagues, she says. So if we consider Susan Collins, we should also consider Mitt Romney, also a senator. Remember, it would only take 4 Republican senators to switch their vote, and then witnesses would be able to take the stand. Here's Mitt Romney.
I think it's increasingly likely that other Republicans will join those of us who think we should hear from John Bolton. And whether there are other witnesses and documents, well, that's another matter. But I think John Bolton's relevance to our decision has become increasingly clear.
Well, here's more evidence of the pressure on Republican unity. Senator Kelly Loeffler tweeting, after 2 weeks, it's clear the Democrats have no case for impeachment. Sadly, my colleague, Senator Romney, wants to appease the left by calling witnesses who will slander Donald Trump during their 15 minutes of fame. She says the circus is over. It's time to move on. Well, let's bring in Gary O'Donoghue, live with us from Washington, D.C. Hi, Gary. So they need 4. Susan Collins and Mitt Romney, have they definitely come across, or they're just thinking about it?
Mitt Romney's a definite. He says he wants to do it and he'll vote for it. Susan Collins is still a maybe. Susan Collins is often a maybe on all sorts of issues, so we'll see whether that firms up. And there are some others who are thinking about it. Lisa Murkowski, we know, from Alaska, is someone who's been thinking about it. There are others too. So they're also clearly talking to one another. If you listen to what Mitt Romney said, they're all obviously talking to one another. And maybe urging one another on, maybe holding one another back, who knows. But they are getting nearer, and the Bolton thing, the Bolton book, has made a huge difference.
Gary, stay with us, please, because all of this gives Donald Trump's legal team plenty to think about. They're into a second day of getting their defence set out at the trial. In the last couple of hours, we've been hearing from one of the key lawyers in the Trump defence team, Ken Starr.
Here at home, in the world's longest-standing constitutional republic, instead of a once-in-a-century phenomenon, which it had been, presidential impeachment has become a weapon to be wielded against one's political opponent. In her thoughtful Wall Street Journal op-ed a week ago Saturday, Peggy Noonan wrote this: impeachment has now been normalized. It won't be a once-in-a-generation act, but an every administration act. Democrats will regret it when Republicans are handing out the pens of the signing ceremony.
Well, it's certainly curious that Ken Starr would suggest that this impeachment process is becoming too frequent. There have only been 3 in history. This one a very long time ago, and Bill Clinton in the late 90s. That impeachment was driven by a special prosecutor, Ken Starr, no less. Here he is giving a press conference at the time. Don't remember him expressing any concerns whatsoever about the impeachment process being abused for political gain, but I guess his position on that has evolved. Gary, you were keeping an eye across Ken Starr's statement. What did you make of his line of attack, or line of defence, I guess I should say?
Deeply academic, kind of real dive into constitutional history. And as you say, the upshot of it really was this is happening too much. That won't, I don't think, carry too much sway, I think, with Democrats, because it was clearly meant as a warning to Democrats. This is going to happen to you when the Republicans are in power, but also him making the argument, which the defence have relied on a lot in this case, that there needs to be a crime in order for there to be an impeachment or a conviction as a result of an impeachment. He says the founders made that very clear in the Constitution. A lot of other people dispute that, including a lot of other constitutional experts. But really a plea, if you like, from the former independent counsel, Ken Starr, to not do this sort of thing, even though it's set out as a provision in the Constitution.
So while Ken Starr's being academic, Susan Collins and Mitt Romney are considering what to do. When do we get to the crux of this? When do the Republicans actually, the senators actually vote on whether witnesses are going to be allowed?
I'm guessing Friday. And the reason I say that is that the President's defence carries on today and will do as well tomorrow. There's then a period of 16 hours of questions, written questions that senators can put to both sides. I think they'll may do that over a bit of the end of tomorrow, but certainly Wednesday and Thursday. And then that's when you get to the business of votes on documents and witnesses on Friday. And there could be those votes on Friday, and it could, in many ways, if they lose the votes, in terms of the Democrats, if they lose the votes, then you could see Saturday a vote on the articles themselves even. And the President could be cleared by Monday.
One more thing I want to ask you about, Gary, because as Gary knows, in order for President Trump to be removed from office, 2/3 of these senators will have to vote to convict President Trump. The likelihood of that happening, given the Republicans have a majority, is very, very low. Yet, during the 2016 US election, a fifth of the now Republican senators opposed Donald Trump becoming president. They said he wasn't fit for office. For example, here's Mitt Romney.
Donald Trump is a phony, a fraud. His promises are as worthless as a degree from Trump University.
Or you could listen to Marco Rubio, who ran against Donald Trump for the Republican nomination.
There's no way the party of Lincoln and Reagan is going to be taken over by a con artist.
Or Senator Lindsey Graham, now a staunch supporter of President Trump. He wasn't in 2016.
Donald Trump would be an absolute, utter disaster for the Republican Party, destroy conservatism as we know it. We would get wiped out, and it would take generations to overcome a Trump candidacy.
And these three men are among the 100 senators who are sitting as jurors in this impeachment trial. And, as I was saying, the outcome is a foregone conclusion because both the Republicans and Democrats at the moment seem set to vote on party lines. And the Republicans have a majority, so we expect Donald Trump to stay in office. During a recent TV interview, Lindsey Graham said, "The thing will come to the Senate. I'll do everything I can to make it die quickly. I'm not trying to pretend to be a fair juror here." Bear in mind, all 100 senators took an oath to be impartial during this trial. So what's causing these men to change from wanting to stop Donald Trump to wanting to help him stay in office? Well, we're not the only one wondering this. Here's an article in the New York Times headline, "Where's Lindsey? After Republican outcry, Graham emerges as a Trump defender." And this article highlights that Mr. Graham's up for re-election this year in South Carolina. That's a state Donald Trump won convincingly and where he's still popular. And this is a pattern among Republicans facing re-election, and this perhaps helps us understand why. A recent Gallup poll shows 88% of Republicans approve of the job President Trump is doing. At the moment, politically, it may well make sense for these senators to stick by the president. We also know Newsweek has picked up on a similar story. It's reporting that 30 Republican senators would vote to impeach the president if the vote was done in secret. That's according to one conservative strategist who was speaking to a Republican senator. Of course, we're not able to verify that, but you get the questions that these articles are raising. Let's bring in Gary O'Donoghue again. It's a tough one for some of these men to explain, isn't it, Gary?
Yes, it is, and those clips are very powerful, and that was only 3.5 years ago, and they've all done 180-degree turnabouts on it, haven't they? And I think a lot of those in the Senate will be frightened of coming out against the president and what impact that might have on their electoral prospects. Also, a lot of them, funnily enough, are frightened of the sort of Twitter tirade that might come their way. That kind of level of sort of opprobrium poured on your head doesn't feel very nice with when you've got 60 million of the president's followers piling in on you as well. So there are all sorts of reasons, but it just shows you the level and the depth of partisanship in this country that people will be prepared to stick by this president, even though it goes completely contrary to what they've said in the past.
Gary, just before I let you go, a quick word about the chronology of American politics this year. This is playing out in Washington. When do the primaries kick in for the Democrats? When do we have to look in two directions at the same time?
You've got a week to wait for that. This time next week, Monday next week, the Iowa caucuses, the first of the votes for the Democratic nomination, that will take place then. On Tuesday of next week, of course, we've got the State of the Union address where the President goes to the Capitol, stands in the House of Representatives, sets out his priorities and his vision for his last year in office. And he'd very much like to do that as a President who'd been acquitted on articles of impeachment.